Hi, I'm Lori Westheimer,
And I'm Devin Eisenhower of the Westheimer Group at Coldwell Banker Heritage.
and we're here today to explain a little bit about closing costs. I think closing costs are probably one of the most mysterious and confusing things for buyers, particularly whenever I am working with them and going through the transaction. And they will often, when we are starting the offer process, ask if the seller can just pay the closing costs, or they assume that they will pay the closing costs,
or they'll ask to just split it. My grandpa told me that when he bought the house, that the seller paid for his closing costs.
Exactly. So I think it's really important to understand, what closing costs are and what items are always going to be paid for by the seller, and what items are typically paid for by the buyer, and what items may or may not be negotiable. So and there is a lot of other issues too, like depending on the type of lending that you use, there might be limits on the amount of money that a seller can contribute towards a buyer's closing costs.
Absolutely. Some of those seller costs that they automatically have, regardless of a negotiated contract, include deed preparation fee and a portion of the title fees.
Yes, and unlike when you buy a car and you have to go to the county and pay the sales tax on the purchase, when you sell a home, the seller actually pays what's the equivalent of a sales tax or a conveyance tax to the county that they live in. And for example, in Montgomery County, that is $3 per thousand. It does vary somewhat depending on the county, but that is always a seller paid cost based on the sale price of the home.
Absolutely. The seller also will have a credit to give to the buyer of property tax of that time that the seller was in the house. That's what's called short and long tax proration.
Yes, and because taxes are paid in arrears, which short and long proration, that is a whole other video explanation, and we are going to get a title representative in who is an expert in explaining tax proration for another video.
And last but not least, sellers actually pay the real estate commission that happens in the transaction, not just the sales side of it, but is paying the buyer side of the commission as well. And this was negotiated before the contract was even wrote. This was back in the listing agreement when they said, I want to sell my house. I'm willing to split commission with listing and buyer agents.
Absolutely. And that is usually, at the end of the day, that is not something that changes from the beginning to the end. So you can see that going into the sale, the seller is already paying a significant amount typically for all those fees when it adds up. And these are going to come out of their closing proceeds, which if they have a mortgage to pay at the end and a loan payoff, it's all about what they're going to net. So at the end of the day, when they've paid all those costs, the question is, do they really want to also pay the buyer's costs, which we'll explain a little bit about what those look like and which ones, might be a little bit more controversial about paying.
Absolutely. So buyers also will pay part of the part of the title fees. And typically they'll pay their owner and lender title insurance. And that's going to really protect the buyer and that lender from any heirs or future claims that could happen to the title.
Yes, something that's going to happen after the sale. So it's a protection for that.
Absolutely. And then there's obviously the lender fees of, the lender getting paid to do the transaction.
Yeah, the lender who initiates a loan, that's their job. They get paid. That's how they make their money. So unfortunately, when you use them to borrow money, the fees that they charge, they are incurring to help you as the buyer buy the house.
Yes. Now, when you get a loan started and you go through that loan approval process, these fees will be explained to you and wrote out to you. But before writing an offer on a house, we always suggest to go back to that lender. We give the address to them. They get taxes. They get all of the fees that might occur and give you a better estimate so you know how much money you need to bring to the table, a rough estimate of that at least.
Right, and a part of that estimate is what is called and known as prepaids. Prepaids are, I think, probably the most controversial and most confusing. because of the way they're collected and the way they're explained. So we're going to do an attempted explanation here. So you'll recall that when you get a mortgage and you're going to be paying a loan, part of your payment is going to be principal and interest, but it's also going to be for taxes and insurance. The taxes and insurance are held in an escrow account. And when the bill comes due from those two, the taxes or the insurance, the lender will actually pay that bill. So you're not paying that on top of it out of pocket. So it gets confusing to figure out, well, why am I paying it in my mortgage and then I'm also paying it up front at the closing table? And that is because simply at the beginning of the contract, whenever you purchase a home, the homeowner's insurance is going to be taking full payment for an entire year prior to you occupying the home. And then over the next year, as you're funding the escrow account, the money that's put into that escrow account will then pay the second year of that insurance. And likewise with taxes, depending on the time of year that you close, there will be a tax bill typically due twice a year. The lender is going to want to collect enough money to pay that next tax bill, because by the time you get to that tax bill, the escrow account won't have enough money in it. So they want to add that to the escrow account just as a cushion to make sure that there's enough money there. So essentially, you're paying for your insurance and your taxes for when you're living in the house. Now, and don't forget, you're also getting a credit already from the seller for a portion of those taxes typically.
Absolutely. So with understanding that, that's going to really help the buyers know who's paying what and kind of get a better feeling of, okay, maybe I shouldn't ask for all the closing costs because they are footing a pretty big bill, or
they're really costs that are buyer costs. I mean, when you buy a house, you need insurance. When you buy a house, you'll be paying taxes on it. So being prepared for those costs and knowing why a seller might push back is extremely important, especially in a competitive marketing situation where we are trying to write offers and get offers accepted. And it really is going to boil down to whether the seller will accept based on, their net proceeds.
Absolutely. So we want to thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions or just want to talk to us, feel free to reach out. We'll be happy to answer anything. Thank you so much for watching.